The field is cold, the platform is rough wood, and the crowd is packed so tight they sway like grain before a storm. A small bell stops the chatter. A man in white steps forward, Urban II, and lifts both hands. He does not preach peace. He lights a fuse. He names a wound, Jerusalem in foreign hands. Pilgrims bled on the road, altars profaned. He points east, not to a map, but to a promise. Then he gives them a sentence that fits inside a heartbeat and explodes inside 1,000 chests. God wills it. The words ripple, flip, and return as a roar. Deus vult, first from the front rows, then from the middle, then from the back where farmers stand on cartwheels to see. The chant becomes a drum. Men tear strips from cloaks, cut red cloth from banner fringes, rip the lining from old coats. Women knot thread with trembling fingers. Crosses are sewn to tunics, pinned to caps, pricked into skin with needles and ash. The mark is vow and destination. The platform becomes an anvil. The Pope hammers. Stagecraft follows doctrine. Urban fixes the theater. Not a basilica, but open sky. Not a council, but a summons. Not subtle theology, but a clear road of guilt, pardon, and glory. Sins, named in public, are promised erasure on a road that leads through steel. He offers indulgence like a key in every hand. Go, he says, and makes go sound like be reborn. Bishops catch the rhythm and translate it into 100 tongues. Heralds ride toward markets. Monks memorize the argument, shorten it, sharpen it, and carry it in their throats from village to village. Oaths begin to stack like firewood. Lords swear with palms on relics. Knights swear with fists on sword pommels. Poor men swear with both hands lifted to a gray November sky. A tremor runs through Europe's bones. In monasteries, ledgers are opened. In kitchens, iron is beaten thin for straps and buckles. In barns, hooves are shod and packs weighed. Smiths work by candle. Priests by dawn light, scribes by firelight, listing names that will not all return. Urban does not raise an army. He authorizes a story. It spreads faster than riders because mothers repeat it at wells and children shout it in lanes. A road that cancels debts, cleanses sins, crowns the brave. Fear is recast as fuel. Hunger becomes holiness if it points east. The slogan lodges in the skull where accounting and conscience meet. Deus vult. 2 words anyone can carry. 2 words strong enough to carry them back. When the crowd breaks, the field is adrift of trampled straw and red threads. The platform empties. The world is suddenly in motion. Pacts, prayers, pledges, because a single afternoon turned faith into itinerary. Winter will bite. Roads will kill. But tonight, Europe glows like a forge, and the sparks are already airborne. The road east begins with a rattle, not a trumpet. Pots on poles, babies in slings, plowmen with billhooks, widows with relics sewn into sleeves. A little monk on a donkey, Peter the Hermit, raises a reed-thin voice and turns want into destiny. No banners of princes, only scraps of cloth, crosses scratched into skin, and the certainty that God will feed them. Because they cannot. They sing until the singing becomes begging. They beg until the begging turns to threats. The march has no spine, only appetite. Holiness curdles early. Along the Rhine, the mob finds an easier enemy than the distant Turk. Synagogues are stormed, ledgers burn. Jews are hauled into squares and offered baptism or death. Blood buys nothing they can eat, but the violence hardens them into believing the road itself absolves. Peter prays, weeps, moves on. Behind him, debts are paid in bodies, and the stain travels with the procession like a shadow. Hunger takes command before spring fades. Bread is a rumor, salt is a memory. Children chew leather thongs. Men trade heirlooms for turnips. Saints' days become a schedule for theft. Indiscipline grows legs. fights over a single kettle, a throat cut for a crust. When they stagger into Hungary, every field looks like Providence and every fence like an insult. Bargains sour, tempers flash, and a spark in a market becomes a city brawl. Villagers die, barns burn. The king's patience burns faster. Companies of riders hammer the pilgrims back onto the road, leaving the ditches cluttered with penitents who will not rise again. And still they shuffle south. German bands, French knots, Italian trickles, converging like tributaries on Constantinople. The city stares down from its walls, gold and stone, appalled. Emperor Alexios sees a flood of mouths, not an army. He ferries them over the Bosporus to be someone else's problem and breathes easier when their ragged backs vanish into Anatolia's glare. Across the straits, the land goes wide and empty. The sun turns helmets into braziers. The ranks, never ranks at all, fray into wandering clusters that chase rumors of rich towns and soft enemies. At a half-ruined fort, they snatch a quick victory and mistake it for a pattern. Scouts return with stories of treasure near Nicaea. The great prize must already be fallen, they say, and the spoils are waiting. Desire outruns sense. 20,000 pour into a narrow wooded valley, laughing, jostling, eager to be first. The wind drops, leaves quit moving. Then the sky darkens with arrows. Kilij Arslan has been watching. His horse archers draw and wheel, black sleet hissing down. The mob cannot form a wall, it cannot form anything. Men throw up shields too late, drop them too soon, run, collide, trample children, fall, rise, fall again. Hooves beat a rhythm of ending. Curved blades flash through cloth and bone. Prayer is shorter than a gallop. By dusk, the valley is a trough of bodies. Survivors stagger to a coastal ruin and beg the sea to save them. Most never see water again. The People's Crusade, 40,000 vows stitched in red, has been translated into silence. Peter's donkey stands tied to an empty post. The First Crusade is not yet an army, and already it has a grave. Gold domes blaze like a second sunrise, and the road of mud and bone ends at walls that look carved from prophecy. Constantinople does not blink. Behind the gates, silk whispers. Outside them, iron clatters. Alexios I Komnenos watches from a chamber where every mosaic is a listening ear. He asked Rome for mercenaries. Europe sent him wolves in capes, dukes with private gods, giants in chain, banners heavy with debt and appetite. He will not feed an army he does not leash. So he builds a leash out of ritual. Audiences are rationed like grain. Each prince climbs through corridors of marble and menace, past eunuchs who know more languages than most bishops know sins. Bow once, twice, no, lower, to the man they call Greek. A gospel, a relic, a cross of crystal. Alexios's voice is soft enough to cut. Swear homage. Swear to return what you take. Swear to be supplied, not unleashed. Godfrey sets his jaw and kneels. Bohemond smiles like a knife and touches the holy things with a conqueror's fingers. Oaths are collected, catalogued, wrapped in silk. Parchment manacles. Logistics is the emperor's true theology. Warehouses rise from ledgers. Grain flows because quills moved yesterday. Oxen, nails, bows, ship timbers, numbers stack like spearheads. 1,000 ferries shuttle hope and hunger across the Bosporus on a schedule that looks like miracle and smells like bureaucracy. When a cart goes missing, a clerk notices. When a clerk disappears, a captain visits at night. The city feeds the beast and keeps the gates shut behind each mouth that leaves. The princes call it stinginess. Alexios calls it survival. But suspicion breeds in the drapery. The Latins see gold and think softness. They see incense and think deceit. They whisper that the emperor betrayed them at Nicaea before he has even saved them there. They finger their swords when servants pour wine, and the servants notice. Bohemond lingers too long at maps of Asia and remembers raiding these same shores years ago. He knows these roads. He wants those ports. Alexios knows Bohemond knows, and smiles anyway. Banquet after banquet glitters like traps. Greek lyres, Latin toasts, veiled threats. A plate of figs arrives when a temper flares. A jest about Homer lands where an insult would draw blood. The emperor's eyes never leave the arithmetic of men. Which barons hate which cousins? Whose retinue eats too fast? Who keeps counting doorways? He bargains with pride the way he bargains for barley. At last the marble river carries them to the water. One by one, banners vanish into the haze, ferried east by imperial oars. On the quay, Alexios folds their oaths into his sleeve and lets the sea take their weight. The princes believe they have extracted supplies from a cautious clerk. The emperor believes he has exported a fire. Between silk and steel, a treaty of convenience holds for one breath more. And then Anatolia waits to test who lied better. Steel flashes in morning sun, and the earth shakes like a drum under hooves. The Frankish charge hits the Seljuk screen with a noise that sounds like doors slamming on the world. Arrows hiss, bend, break on mail. Lances don't bend. Where the horse archers swarm and peel away like smoke, the destriers keep coming. A wall of meat and iron that refuses to learn fear. Nicaea watches from behind its triple belt of stone, lake glittering at its back like an extra moat carved by God. Kilij Arslan rides the hills, testing, teasing, stinging. The old dance, dart in, loose, vanish. It works on pride and on light cavalry. It fails when the Franks dismount, lock shields and plant forests of spear points. Bohemond throws his line forward and then roots it, daring the arrows to choose between mail and time. Godfrey rotates units like clockwork, fast enough that no gap becomes a throat. The Seljuks find blood, but never panic. The Latin countercharge finds panic, and panic multiplies. The siege tightens. Ropes of supply stretch from Byzantine storehouses to Latin mouths. Sufficiency measured in ledgers and curses. Engines of timber grow from raw planks into teeth. Battering rams wrapped in wet hides. Mangonels that sling houses into stones. But Nicaea is two-faced. The walls the Franks can see, and the Watergate, the lake, feeds. Barges slip at night, bringing grain and nerve. Every morning the garrison shouts louder because their bread didn't run out. Then the emperor changes the board. Alexios orders ships hauled overland like oxen in armor, keels on greased rollers, crews heaving to flute and drum until masts bob among orchards. At dawn, the city wakes to sails on its private lake and goes suddenly quiet. The Watergate is not a gate anymore. It's a mirror with knives. Now starvation has a schedule. Inside the walls, fear learns math. The garrison counts barrels. The counts get smaller. Envoys leave by a postern wearing faces that practice defeat. Not to the Latin tents with their hungry eyes and sharpened appetites, but along a narrow thread of night to the emperor's agents. The offer is simple. Surrender to Byzantium. Receive protection. Avoid sack. Alexios accepts before the ink dries, because politics wastes less blood than cavalry. It happens just before sunrise. Latin ladders go up to trumpets and prayer and freeze. Over the towers, not the boar of Bologna, not the dragon of Taranto, but the double-headed eagle blooms in the new light. Imperial shields line the battlements. A Greek voice announces terms already signed in secret. No sack. No loot, no cleansing by sword. The gates open to a velvet procession of eunuchs, clerks, and guards who take possession with receipts. Bohemond's smile cuts sideways. Godfrey's fists close, then open. Discipline is a leash he hates and keeps. In the ranks, men spit, curse, weep at the arithmetic of promises undone. Months of hunger and wounds, and not a coin of plunder to justify the ghosts. Alexios distributes gifts, gold bowls, fine horses, polite gratitude, and the alliance holds by 3 threads: food, roads, and the fact that Jerusalem is still east. But something breaks that no gift can mend. The Latins march on, victorious and insulted, armies intact, trust diminished, and a reckoning postponed. Heat slams down like a lid, and the world turns to dust and screaming. Bohemon's vanguard wakes to the hiss of 10,000 arrows and the drumbeat of hooves. Horses rear, men lurch to their knees, and the first flight of black-feathered rain stitches tents to bodies. "Form!" he bellows. The Normans rip canvas down for cover, drag wagons into a ring, and pull the civilians inside. Shields lock, spearheads bloom between gaps, and the ground inside the square becomes a hospital and a chapel. The Seljuk horse archers circle like a whetstone, shaving courage to slivers, ride in, loose, vanish, again, again, again. Each pass leaves more mail bright with barbs, more throats raw with thirst. Women run water skins along the inside of the shield wall, ducking splinters and fletching. Priests mutter Latin over men who answer in Norman French and sigh in blood. Bohemond moves the line like a door on its hinges. When the left bows, he stiffens the right. When the right smokes, he cools it with fresh spears. No one charges. Everyone lives minute to minute. By noon, the sun is a hammer, and armor turns to ovens. The archers press closer, tasting the wobble. Arrows bite through shield rims. Gaps open where exhaustion has hands. A mounted rush smashes the wagons on one corner, and for a breath, the ring caves, then refastens with knives and curses. Bohemond throws in his last reserve. A dozen knights on blown horses, not to break out, but to shove men back into their own courage. The square holds, smaller, uglier, alive. A dust plume smears the far ridge. At first it looks like more death. Then the glint resolves into lances. Too long for Turks, too many for scouts. Horns answer horns. Godfrey's column has come down out of the heat like weather. Infantry first in close files, then cavalry cresting behind with pennons stiff as new bark. The Seljuks wheel to meet the threat, trying to avoid the anvil in front of them and the hammer behind. Too late. Godfrey throws the foot straight at the bowman, shields high, spears low, swallowing arrow shock in measured steps. The horse waits until the Seljuks swing wide to search for flanks, and then detonates. Destriers thunder down the slope in a single slab, riders crouched, lances level, the earth bucking under iron. The first impact is a sound like timber splitting. The second is silence where a line used to be. Horse archers try to skirmish away, but the field is now full of Latin spears, and their circles have corners. What had been a siege in the open turns into a rout. Packs, tents, and camels change owners at spear point. The Turk camp vomits treasure and water, the sweetest gulp of the war. Bohemond stalks the wreckage, face black with dust, eyes still hunting. Godfrey's gauntlets drip where the lance bit too deep. The princes clasp forearms, and no one mentions how close the day had leaned toward disaster. They count their dead under a sky that still burns, and then they count lessons. Never outrun your shielded corps. Never split columns within arrow flight. Pin with infantry. Kill with the heavy horse. Dorylaeum is victory, but its price reads like a manual. Logistics, discipline, timing. The road east will ask all three again, without warning and at interest. The sun stops being light and becomes a weapon. Helmets cook skulls, tongues crack, and the air itself scrapes the lungs like sandpaper. Beyond Dorylaeum, the war turns to thirst. a long brown corridor of heat where maps lie and wells are rumors. Men cut the straps from pack horses with trembling hands and pray the animals don't drop before the next shadow. Many do, collapsing into neat, obscene heaps, ribs ticking in the furnace wind. When a wineskin appears, it moves down the line like a relic. Lips touch leather, not liquid. Armor blossoms with salt. Mail rusts between sunrise and noon. Hoof rot takes the remounts. Flies take the eyes of the ones that fall. Priests hear confessions that are only lists of symptoms. The proudest riders trade saddles for staggering, dragging greaves that ring on stones. Arrows are forgotten. Water is the enemy's best archer now. The column leaves behind bright things, captured silk, bits of harness, finally whole chests, just to shave a breath off the weight of living. The mountains don't cool it, they sharpen it. Paths crumble to knife edges, and the baggage animals go one by one over the side, the silence after each fall heavier than the crash. Rain comes once, not as mercy, but as glue, turning dust to suction that swallows boots and tempers. Men boil leather, cut the throats of dying horses for blood, and then retch it back up. At night, tents look like shrines to exhaustion. In the morning, the shrines are gone, burned for firewood or left as markers where a comrade simply stopped being able to move. Somewhere in that slow catastrophe, Baldwin of Boulogne redraws the crusade to include only himself. He watches maps like gamblers watch dice. East of the main road sits Edessa, wealthy, Christian-ruled, ringed by enemies and ruled by an Armenian, Thoros, who needs a sword and a story. Baldwin can provide both. He peels away from the host with a small, hard company, the kind of men who prefer certainty to sermons. They follow the river, trade prayers for promises, and arrive dust white at a city that greets them like rain. Baldwin plays savior without blinking. He rides the walls, salutes the churches, swears to defend the flock and its shepherd. Thoros adopts him. Formal robes, public tears, the theater of kinship, and for a day the city exhales. Then the backstage work begins. Baldwin's friends hold gates at night. Coin changes loyalty's name. The crowd finds its anger at the right moment, and Thoros, wrapped in a rope and fear, meets a wall he cannot survive. Adoption becomes inheritance. A count is manufactured where a pilgrim stood. Edessa changes Baldwin more than he changes Edessa. He learns receipts as quickly as he learned routes. Taxes tallied, garrison rolls verified, granaries locked and blessed. He marries Armenian, eats Armenian, and speaks the new tongue briskly enough to order hangings and hymns. The crusade calls this a detour. Baldwin calls it strategy. A crusader state sprouts in the dry wind. Stone, coin, oath, and behind the main army a hinge is forged. Back on the road, the host staggers on, lighter from all it lost and heavier from what it now knows, that hunger marches with them, that mountains don't move, that some men conquer by ledger as surely as by lance. Jerusalem remains a shimmer on the horizon. Between shimmer and steel lies Anatolia, still taking its interest in flesh. Antioch rises like a stone animal that does not blink. 400 towers, miles of wall, a citadel clawed into a mountain. The Orontes coils at its feet like a pet serpent. The Crusaders take the Bridge of Iron in a spray of blood and realize the joke immediately. You can seize a throat and still not strangle a giant. Their numbers cannot wring the whole colossus, so they build a half noose and wait for winter to tighten it. The giant waits back. Inside, Yagisian sweeps Christians out the gates to starve the besiegers instead of his granaries. The patriarch swings in an iron cage from the wall, an icon recut as a warning. Outside, the green valley turns to ruts and then to a brown sea. The camp slides between mud and sickness. Bellies cramp. Feet rot, and tents sag under rain that never seems to finish falling. Genoese ships cough up occasional food at St. Simeon. Every cart must run a gauntlet of horsemen who know every bend of road. Each loaf that reaches camp has a body, cost, baked in. Rations become rituals. A crust is divided like a relic. A wineskin is promoted to miracle. Men boil belts, scrape marrow from the last ox bones, and count days by which animals vanish from the stew. Horse, dog, rat. Pride goes first. Armor is pawned for a handful of barley. Then discipline. Raids on gardens close to the walls turn into little funerals. The dead hauled back on shields that used to be useful. Foragers leave as squads and return as rumors. Desertion starts to wear a rope-burn path toward the coast. At night, silhouettes slide down lines from the ramparts. Rope dancers, gone into the dark to seek ships, or simply to stop hearing other men chew nothing. Peter the Hermit himself tries to vanish and is dragged back to shame and prayers. Leaders shout, bribe, and bless in equal measure. The mud listens and answers with silence. From the lowest, hungriest ranks grows a new kind of fear. They call them Tafurs, barefoot, scabbed, cloaked in sacking, bearing clubs and a certainty that hunger makes holy anything it touches. Stories spread faster than fevers, that they cook enemy flesh, that they laugh at arrows, that they ask for alms and give back omens. Whether truth or medicine, the legend works. Patrols flee at the sight of scarecrows crowned with thorns of twine. Antioch tests theology as much as tendons. The princes weigh oath against appetite. Bohemond takes measurements not of walls but of men, learning which gate captains drink, which merchants curse their masters in Armenian. The army cannot climb the stone monster, cannot starve it quickly, and cannot abandon it without admitting that God's road ends in a ditch, so they become a stubborn stain on the landscape, half siege, half cemetery, teaching themselves to live as if dying less rapidly were victory. When the first cold cuts deeper than any sword, the valley's colors drain to iron and ash. Fires gutter in trenches, psalms rasp like saws. Overhead, the giant city keeps its lights, warm and numerous, as if to remind the men outside what a hearth used to feel like. The bridge they took on day one groans under traffic still, but no one marches triumphantly across it. It is merely the place where hope changes sides, back and forth, with every cart that makes it through. A window, not a wall, breaks Antioch. Bohemond stops measuring stones and starts measuring souls. He finds Firuz, a resentful tower captain with a grievance and keys that fit the city like teeth. Gold sweetens rage. Promises salted. The giant will not be toppled. It will be unbuttoned. The plan is a whisper with a blade inside. By day, the Crusader host shuffles south as if to raid. By night, it doubles back like a wolf circling to the throat. 60 chosen men, faces smeared, fingers numb, cradle a ladder of leather and rope against the black mass of Firuz's tower. Above, a shutter cracks. One slit of candle, one hostage city. The wind drowns the clink of rings. The wall breathes damp and old. First over is Fulcher of Chartres, scribe turned killer, who whispers a prayer and then cuts 2 centuries into silence. Blood looks darker in moonlight. More climb. Hooks bite stone. Hands bite hooks. They heave themselves onto a walkway slick with their own sweat and fear. Firuz opens the inner wood like a coffin lid. A bar slides. A bolt lifts. And with a long exhausted sigh, Antioch's lower gates forget their duty. Trumpets stay strangled in their sacks. Knives do the announcing. The doors yawn and the Crusader tide surges. Normans and Flemings spill into streets that were nightmares by rumor and become nightmares by contact. The army that has eaten belts and boiled hoof now eats distance, block by block. Yagessian flees into darkness and meets an axe in a peasant's lane. His head takes the last sensible road, up a spear. The lower city buckles, fire sketches, maps no cartographer planned. But the giant was built with a second heart. High above, the citadel refuses the story. Its garrison slams shutters, wheels engines to the parapets, and turns every approach into a chute for stones. Daylight finds the Crusaders owning markets and alleys and fountains, and living under a roof of arrows from the mountain crown. They have captured a city and trapped themselves beneath it. Then the horizon darkens like spilled ink. Kerboga of Mosul arrives not as a column, but as a continent. Banners like a forest, tents sprouting overnight, hooves combing the fields. The noose the Latins tried to throw becomes a noose thrown back. St. Simeon is smothered. The roads pinch shut. The Orontes runs between two armies that both think it theirs. The Crusaders, who stormed gates in ecstasy, learn the taste of stone when eaten from the inside. Bohemond plants his banner anyway, bold on a tower, practical in a ledger. He reminds the princes, "This city fell to my ladder and my lie. It will be mine when we live through this." They nod because the ground shakes and bargains are cheaper than bread. Priests hoist relics to bleach the fear. Soldiers stack rubble into walls inside walls. Firuz's window is now a memory and a moral. It took a slit to win a city, and it will take a miracle to keep it outside. Kerboga's black tide licks the edges. Patient above, the citadel grinds its teeth. Between them, the victors count their dead and wait for hunger to finish recruiting. A rusted scrap becomes a thunderbolt because starving men decide it will. Peter Bartholomew staggers into the church like a fever walking, eyes alight with private fire. He speaks the language of last chances. St. Andrew, a dream, a promise buried under the floor. Picks bite stone. Hours bleed. Hope frays. Then his hands vanish into the pit and rise with iron. Pitted, brown, mean to look at. The nave erupts. Relic or ruse, no one cares. In the ledger of sieges, belief is heavier than bread. Overnight, the camp molts despair. Priests parade the lance on a pole like a spear point torn from heaven. Bones rattling men stand taller as if fed. Bohemond does the math, the only math that matters now. If they wait, hunger will do Kerboga's bookkeeping. If they sally, they either die quickly or change the bill for everyone. He divides the host into lines like ribs around a newly found heart. Infantry first to take the arrow storm. Knights corked behind to puncture when the moment softens. Standards not along the road to the bridge gate. The citadel glowers above, unconverted and unappeased. Kerboga laughs when the Crusaders open Antioch, thin, pale, swaying, but not running. He loosens arrows. The first rank flinches and then locks. Hymns thicken the air. The priest with the lance strides the center, as if dragging a cord that keeps the army from collapsing backward. The Turks sweep to enclose, customary as tide. But the Christians do not chase, and they do not crack. They march, step, shield, step. The distance shrinks to a place where hooves lose poetry and meet spear. The hinge turns fast. Godfrey's wedge bites a seam. Tancred rips it wider. Raymond's men ram the gap with the dull certainty of a falling door. On the flanks, contingents in Kerboga's coalition, men who came for glory, not for trench work, stare into a wall that will not oblige their arrows. Rumor sprints. The citadel has sallied. The Franks have angels. Your ally is withdrawing. Panic is a geometry lesson taught with hooves. One corner moves. The shape is gone. Banners fold inward. Horse archers tangle. Commanders shout their names into a wind made of metal. Kerboga tries to stitch the cloth mid-tear. He rides, gestures, threatens. The fabric keeps ripping. The second Crusader line becomes a first. The third becomes a knife. What looked like ghosts at dawn look like butchers at noon. The Mosuli general yields the only ground left. Away, his camp buckles. Tents become sails for those fast enough to flee. Treasure becomes ballast for those who are not. By sunset, the field is a broken abacus. Antioch has owners now. Bohemond claims with both hands. Standard on the tower, terms to the princes, thanks to the lance. Spoken coolly, tallied privately. Relic or planted iron, it swung the hinge. Morale fought for them. Discipline finished it, and coalition politics murdered their enemy. The citadel, seeing tomorrow's arithmetic, lowers its pride and opens. Antioch, won by a ladder, kept by a vision, becomes the Normans' prize, sealed with blood, rumor, and a signature written in other men's names. They boiled leather, then rats, then nothing. Winter pinned Mayorat like a knife, and the Crusader camp answered with coughs, fevers, and the dry clatter of empty pots. Mud froze around the stakes. Lice traveled from corpse to cloak with diplomatic immunity. Men woke to find a tent mate stiff, eyes rimmed in salt. The siege should have been a problem of ladders and walls. Hunger made it a lesson in how thin the skin is over the animal. Marat sat on its low rise behind ditches and timber, stubborn where wealth was small but grain mattered. Raiding parties brought back thorns and rumors. Every convoy from the coast bled out under Seljuk hooves. In the streets behind Crusader lines, the Tafurs, those barefoot saints of filth, preached, scavenged, and stared at you the way a dog stares at a bone. Priests blessed snow, hoping to turn it into bread. Knights pawned spurs for a bowl of hot water with a shadow in it. Scurvy unstitched gums. Dysentery signed its name in the latrines. Even victory at Antioch tasted like coins. Bohemond and Raymond argued over banners and futures while the trenches filled with present tense. Engines creaked forward. Sappers bit at foundations with iron mouths. The defenders fought mean, as hungry men do, with pots of fire and sudden gates that spat steel. A breach opened, because wood is mortal. The wall fell not like a city conquered, but like a cupboard forced in a starving house. The killing, quick, ragged, righteous to some, ended at doors that held only dust. Then came the part no hymn can launder. Chroniclers wrote it down because to omit it would be a lie too grand for God. Men cut flesh for broth. They roasted limbs above small guilty flames. They dug shallow pits, not for graves, but for meat that wouldn't run. Some said only Tafurs, others said all sorts, noble and not. When the night was long and the stomach howled like wolves, mothers hid children. The swift learned to sleep in trees. The smell turned the wind into an accomplice. Terror sprinted ahead of the army after Mayorat. Markets closed at the rumor of a cross on a shield. Gates bargained instead of boasting. Ambassadors met advance guards with keys, water, and livestock. Because walls can debate arrows, but cannot argue with famine, weaponized. The Latin princes marched on with a new instrument in their bag. Reputation. Sharper than a lance, cheaper than a siege tower, carried by the mouths of those who had seen too much and wished never to see it again. When the Crusaders finally left that city of empty ovens, they were lighter by doubts and heavier by stain. Snow squeaked under their boots. Ravens marked their route as if reading from a psalm of carrion. No one spoke of glory that day. They spoke in logistics. How far to the next well? How many oxen left? How many hands to push the towers when Jerusalem rose ahead? Behind them, Mayorat cooled, a caution carved in winter. Starve an army long enough, and it will learn to frighten the world without lifting a sword. They rolled the sea onto land. Genoese timbers, hauled from broken hulls at Jaffa, became ribs and spines. Towers taller than fear. Hammers spoke day and night. Men stitched oxhide wet over the wood to drink the sparks of Greek fire. Thirst gnawed louder than the saws. Beyond bowshot, Jerusalem blazed in the sun and would not share a cup. Wells outside were poisoned or barred. Tongues swelled black. A skin of water cost a life. Faith sang anyway, raw-throated hymns that tried to drown the rattle in chests. The first assault failed like a bad prayer. One ladder, too few hands, a wall that laughed. Iftikhar al-Dawlah's garrison jeered from the crenels, showing buckets brimming from cisterns. The men below had dust for drink and iron for hope. So the princes turned engineers. Godfrey counted stones, angles, ranges. His carpenters counted pegs. At night, under muffled orders, his tower came apart into numbered bones, then marched 1,000 paces east and rose again by lantern light. When dawn found it, the wall opposite was still sleeping under thin preparations. Trumpets tore the morning. Mangonels beat the ramparts into gravel. Crossbow strings twanged until fingers bled. The southern tower bogged in a ditch. Raymond's men cursing, shoving, dying in place. So the city's fate hinged on a different horizon. Godfrey's bridge edging forward, creak by creak. Under a rain of oil, pitch, and stones that smashed men into meat. Inside the tower, it was smoke, prayer, and the stubborn arithmetic of replacement. Every fallen hauberk filled by another. On the top deck, the Duke of Lower Lotharingia stood with hook and spear. A beam seized the parapet. The bridge slammed down with a groan that sounded like the end of a century. Godfrey crossed first, lean, pale, eyes like nails, followed by a crush of iron and oaths. Shields locked, blades worked. The wall shuddered, then split, and the cross climbed above it like a verdict. What followed was not battle. It was decision enacted at sword's edge. The gatehouse opened from within and the tide poured. Streets narrowed into flumes for blood. Doors broke. Families died where they prayed. The Temple Mount filled, then emptied into silence that stank of hot iron and ash. In the Templum Salomonis, the bodies rose in piles that dulled bootsteps. Horses slipped in the gore of other men's faith. The synagogue burned with its congregation, trapped singing, smoke curving the psalms into a question. No one answered. And yet, because humans are contradictions in armor, the killers laid down weapons and wept at the sepulchre. Sticky-handed, red to the wrist, they pressed foreheads to cool stone and sobbed gratitude. Godfrey refused a crown in that hour, declaring he would not wear gold where Christ wore thorns, and took instead a title that made murder feel like guardianship. By evening, the hymn and the shriek had braided into one rope that pulled a new kingdom out of ruin. The towers stood charred. The engines were quiet. Wind skated the walls. Below, pyramids of dead leaned against the wisdom of victory. Jerusalem was taken. The faith of Europe had found its proof, written in Latin on stone and in blood on everything else. They crowned a silence. Dawn crawled over Jerusalem and found men asleep in their mail among pyramids of the dead. Crows hopping throne-like on shoulders that had prayed last night and bled at noon. The streets were a text written in clotted red. The wind turned pages no one wanted to read. In the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, iron-kneed knights set swords aside and wept. And Godfrey of Bouillon, bone-tired, eyes rimmed with smoke, refused the gold circle they pressed toward him. "No king," he said, "not where Christ wore thorns." He took instead the harder fiction, Defender of the Holy Sepulchre, a title nailed over a reality made of ration lists, watch bills, and graves. Work began before the flies finished gathering. Gates were cleared, wells measured, loot counted, quarrels sorted with the same blunt efficiency as siege timbers. Priests sprinkled holy water on thresholds, still sticky. Masons chalked plans on stones blackened by fire. The victors parceled quarters, swore oaths, and erected a government out of tents and proclamations. Baldwin watched with a ledger-maker's stare. Raymond argued scripture like a contract. Tancred patrolled alleys where ash drifted like slow snow. Every decision was an answer to a simple problem: how to hold what had been taken by miracle and murder. The corpses were dragged to the ditches, men gagged and kept dragging. Beneath the hymns of thanksgiving, the city had the sound of a slaughterhouse being swept. Scrapes, sloshes, the dull knock of bone on stone. From the walls, you could see the line of the desert and feel history gathering there like heat. Messengers whispered the same shape of warning. Ascalon bristled. Egypt moved. The Fatimid blade would come looking for the hand that struck Jerusalem. Godfrey's title tasted of iron and sleeplessness. He set watches along the Jaffa road, sent riders to the ports, ordered the engines patched rather than burned. Relics were displayed to knit a state from strangers. Charters were written to keep knives sheathed among allies who distrusted each other more than they feared the horizon. The sepulchre's guardianship meant granaries stocked, cisterns guarded, and every church made fortress by habit. Night brought visions, some holy, some only hunger with wings. Day brought emissaries with open palms and closed intentions. The new kingdom stood on swords, jammed point first into sand, and on paperwork, copied by men with shaking hands. No coronation feast came, only hard bread shared in halls that still smelled of smoke and tallow. By week's end, the pyramids of corpses were lower. The walls carried Latin banners, the markets murmured cautiously, but the air vibrated like a plucked string. South, a cloud of lances. West, sails. The faithful had taken a city. The world had taken offense. What ended at the gate began at the skyline. Not a pilgrimage fulfilled, but a frontier drawn. The blade had fallen and crowned a guardian. Now the counterstroke gathered. War between worlds. No longer a rumor, but a schedule.